Andrew Morton, it's so great to have you here. You live in Pasadena now, born and raised in England. You came here on assignment and you fell in love with somebody who was living in Pasadena, and now you have a home in Pasadena. On the other hand, Meghan Markle, born and raised in Southern California, stomping ground in Pasadena, so you say in your book, which we'll talk about, and now a part of the royal family. So you two have sort of switched places, so to speak. What do you think it's like for her coming from here to Windsor?
Well, great to speak to you. I mean, I have to say, the stars, as Prince Harry would say, were aligned. They were aligned, in my case, romantically, because I met my future wife, Carolyn, who is now my wife, and we live together in Pasadena and also London. And then we've got Meghan, and Pasadena, I think, is kind of like Meghan Markle Central. It's where her old boyfriends live. It's where she learnt to drink tea in the afternoon before seeing the Queen at Buckingham Palace. It's where she appeared in various plays in La Cañada. And she went to school at Immaculate Heart. So, you know, she's very much a local girl, a Hollywood princess, as I call her. And living in England, well, there's an awful lot she's got to learn. How do you say words like Leicester, which is a town? Getting used to the fact that there's very few hot yoga places, and there are very few ripe avocados as well. So it's something of a culture shock. Then living at Kensington Palace, as she did do, and then she just moved to Frogmore House. That too it's a great learning curve, you know, because the royal family are a family of little idiosyncrasies and habits and time-honoured traditions. And lo and behold, the person that breaks them. I'll give you an example. Sandringham at Christmas, there's a jigsaw that's laid out on the piano, and the last piece is always reserved for the Queen to put in. Now, I can just imagine Meghan, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and eager to please, would finish off the jigsaw and say, "I've done it." And they all look at her, you know, shaking their heads.
Now, do you think somebody must have told her beforehand, whatever you do, don't put the last piece down?
I'm sure that Prince Harry spends half his time saying, you know, you should do this, you should do that. I mean, for example, Balmoral in Scotland, their country home in the Highlands, there are various walks that only the Queen goes on or Prince Charles goes on, so that they don't meet each other as they go around. So there's lots of it's a family of foibles. I remember Diana, Princess Diana's or Lady Diana Spencer's her grandmother said to her, you know, they're a very different breed to you and I.
So they just have very set rules, and if you overstep, that's a problem. Even today, do you think?
It can be a problem, yes. I mean, funny enough, I was talking to Diana's former old bodyguard, Ken Wharf, the other day, and we were just saying that the biggest problem that you have when you move inside the royal family is learning all the little traditions and the little habits, the idiosyncrasies that make them unique.
Right. Wow. Well, in your research about Meghan, you learned that she had many connections to Pasadena. Can you talk about some of those?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was walking down the street in West Pasadena, and a woman came up to me and said, "Well, you should go see Edmund Fry." So I went to see Edmund Fry, who runs the Rose Tree Cottage, and he explained how she'd been there on numerous occasions to drink afternoon tea and enjoy, you know, scones and clotted cream. Her boyfriend, one of her first boyfriends, lived down the road in Pasadena Avenue. She appeared in theatrical productions at St. Francis in La Cañada. Right. So she's very much, and she was a homecoming queen as well. So, you know, she's very much a Pasadena girl.
That's right.
Or a Pasadena princess.
That's right, a Pasadena princess. What do you think about the Rose Court and the whole Tournament of Roses that happens here in Pasadena?
Well, it's like something out of a 1950s postcard. It's kind of rinky-dink, but it's charming. I mean, lots of people put thousands of hours of effort into it, and to make these splendid creations, it's timeless.
That's right, it is, but it's funny that you call it rinky-dink, I guess compared to England, right?
Well, it's just it's very old. It's timeless. It's a great tradition, but it's very much of a something from yesterday almost. It's not, it does not involve Instagram and the rest of it. It involves a lot of people putting a lot of time and effort into making these incredible creations.
That's right. You were in England during the time of the wedding. What was the feeling there in England? Your friends and family, what did they think about Meghan Markle, an American, marrying Prince Harry?
Well, I was commentating on the wedding for ABC with David Muir and Robin Roberts, and we were all terribly excited to watch this great procession. And I remember the feeling was very much that, before the wedding, it was, will her father turn up, will he not turn up? And it was overshadowed by that kind of family rancor. And then the moment she walks down the aisle, starts to walk down the aisle on her own, with the beautiful aria, the Handel's aria in the background, everything fell away, and it seemed very peaceful, very calm, and it was a very family occasion, even though there weren't many of Meghan's family there, just her mother. But it felt quite inclusive, and it felt very warm and very intimate. And I think that the choice of St George's Chapel, together with the coach ride, made everybody felt like they were part of it.
And what about her mother? Have you actually interviewed her and spoken with her?
Dora has been very quiet and very dignified. She's not given any interviews, and I don't think she will do. She will be her daughter's rock and helpmate, I'm sure, that when the baby's born, and I'm sure she'll be fussing around baby Sussex like any doting grandmother.
Based on all the interviews you did for the biography you did of Meghan, what is your sense of the relationship between Meghan and her mom? Has it always been strong? Did it go through struggles?
Well, Meghan's from a broken home. Her mother walked out on her father, Tom Markle, when she was just 2 years old, so she was a baby in arms just about. And so she's lived this fairly rackety life, bouncing between father and mother. She painted it as the mother and father remain friends. Her half sister and brother don't see it that way. But her mother was one who always showed her, a bit like Diana with William and Harry, showed her daughter the other side of life. So when they went to Jamaica, they went to look around slums. When they went to Mexico, she showed Meghan the other side of life, not the beautiful beaches of Acapulco, but some of the more squalid areas, to give her a sense of what life was really like for people. She's very determined, smart, sassy, and someone who's really tried to give her values to her daughter. And I think you can see that in Meghan's determination and her smarts.
I remember them in the car together driving to Windsor Castle for the wedding, and it seemed like a very long car ride because we saw it for quite a while. And of course they knew cameras were on them and there was a lot going on, so obviously they aren't necessarily going to be intimate, but I think many of us wondered what that relationship is today, and are they very close? Is she really her rock? Do you think?
Well, they speak a lot on the phone, obviously. I mean, Doria lives in Los Angeles. It'd be there's speculation that she could well move over to Britain to help her daughter settle in, especially as she's got, she's taken it all on in the last year. She's had a pregnancy. She's got a new house. She's got a new career inside the royal family. I mean, for anybody, it's a challenge. She seems to have taken it like a duck to water, but as we all know, swans seem serene, but they're paddling madly beneath that.
From your point of view, what are the differences or similarities between Meghan and Kate?
Well, clearly, Kate is a lot younger and had less of a sense of the world than Meghan. Meghan had her own career. She tried desperately to get a toehold in Hollywood. I mean, she did various pilots. They weren't taken up, and then finally, after 8 years or so, after leaving college, she managed to get the gig on Suits, which propelled her to international stardom. With Kate, she left college and she earned the sobriquet Waity Kate because she didn't have a job and she seemed to be at William's beck and call. And it seemed that she kind of groomed herself for her future role as a wife and helpmate of the future king. And so it comes about. And I think that they're very different people. Meghan is very self-assured, someone who is very competent behind the microphone, is at ease in public, speaking publicly. Kate is less so, rather more diffident, rather more shy. Nobody really expects them to be best friends. I mean, why should they be? But they seem to have an amicable relationship. The tabloid narrative has been to go from turning them from sisters-in-law to sisters at war, and that's exactly how they did. They did exactly the same with Princess Diana and Sarah Ferguson. That they started off as friends and then they were enemies at each other's throats. It's a caricature.
Working for the Daily Mail back in the day and working at a few other tabloids, you know what it is like to be there. Do you really think that it's the tabloids selling magazines and putting these ideas in our heads that there really is a feud, that Meghan is a very demanding boss? What do you think about that?
Well, I was astonished at I had a wry smile at the fact that the tabloid narrative today was exactly the same as the one that Diana put up with. First, they said that Meghan has sacked many of the staff are leaving. Well, Diana had the same thing. She was accused of firing the bodyguard, the valet, the private secretary, when they all just kind of decided to move on because Prince Charles was no longer single, no longer a bachelor, and his lifestyle had changed. And I remember Diana coming across and saying, "I just don't sack people." And then the second part of the narrative was that Diana got rid of Charles's friends. Well, to a degree she did, because she made sure that Camilla Parker Bowles, his old flame, was no longer part of the circuit. And in her favour, she did say that Prince Charles voluntarily offered to give up those kind of relationships. That was in the early days of the marriage. Similarly, with Meghan, we've got the idea that that her staff have moved on because of her 5 a.m. emails to them, and there's now intimations that Harry's friends have been sent into exile. So it's following the same kind of narrative, and I think it is unfortunately a narrative that's about strong women. Diana was a strong woman. Meghan's a strong woman, and the media are always trying to put down strong women.
So would you say that could be one reason you left the tabloid business, because you had to write stories that weren't necessarily true?
No, I worked for various newspapers in the 1980s, but I was also writing books at the same time. My first book was on Prince Andrew, called Andrew the Playboy Prince, back in 1982, described by one newspaper as the worst book ever written. So things could only get better after that. Second book I wrote was actually when I first met the Queen, 1982. 83. I was in San Diego for the California tour of the Queen and Prince Philip, and the royal yacht came into harbour, and I was so mesmerised by this wonderful floating palace that I wanted to write a book about it, and that became my second book. So, and I found that I was having more fun writing books than writing newspaper stories, and so I eventually went freelance and started writing books under my own name.
At what point did you meet Princess Diana?
Well, I first met Princess Diana in April 1983 in the desert heart of Australia, called a place called Alice Springs, where Diana was about to embark on a 6-week trip. And before that they embarked on a trip, they used to have press cocktail parties, and you exchange banter, and it's always light, bright and trite. She always used to make a joke about my ties, and I'm 6'4", so I was looking down on her,
right,
whereas she at 5'10" would normally look down on other people. So we always used to have a bit of a joke and a laugh, and that was the first time I met her. And I remember she came out a very shy, blushing ingenue. She hadn't done many royal engagements. She was, worried about this colossal tour that she was undertaking. Prince William was then just a baby, and he accompanied them. And she came out as an innocent, and she went back to London a veteran, a polished professional, a star of the Royal Roadshow. And the one thing that started to put a knife into the relationship between Charles and Diana was the fact that every time they got out of a car to go on a walkabout, the crowd would groan if it was Prince Charles, and they'd all be in raptures if it was Diana. And so Prince Charles, who was used to being the star of the show, got sick of this, and he blamed Diana.
Really? And you really think he got sick of it, and it really did truly bother him? He
made light of it in public, saying that he had 3 wives to shake hands, but there was a personal, private sense of aggrievement. And
you, so you met Diana, and then did you often meet her? How did your relationship with Princess Diana grow?
I used to meet Diana from time to time at these cocktail parties in Italy, in Canada, and elsewhere. And at the same time, I was building up friendships with her friends, and one of whom was a chap called James Colthurst. He was a doctor, and we used to play squash together. And she realised that she knew that I was a supporter of hers. She knew I was writing a biography of her, and she said to James one day, "Would Andrew like an interview?" Well, of course I would. The most famous, most photographed woman in the world, talking, frankly about her life. I expected something about, her charity work, her humanitarian mission, what she hoped to achieve in the future. But it wasn't that at all. It was this kind of desperate cry for help, where I listened to a tape that James had made of Diana talking about her life. And I heard about this woman, Camilla Parker Bowles, never heard of her. Heard about this illness, bulimia nervosa, an eating disorder, which she suffered from. Heard about these kind of half-hearted suicide attempts. I mean, it was astonishing. And I heard all this in a working man's cafe in North London, in a place called Ruislip. And I went to see James, and I put these headphones on, and it was like entering another world, genuinely, because you were let into a secret, and it was a secret that very few people knew about, and it was a dangerous secret. And you remember the movie All the President's Men, and the Robert Redford character that meets Deep Throat in the garage, and then it's a very quiet, silent, gloomy place, and he's terrified. Well, it was the same going back, from Ruislip back to my home, because I went on the subway and I made sure I kept well back from the edge of the platform.
Wow.
there followed then 18 months of subterfuge, of intrigue, of questioning of Diana about her life, everything from her childhood to her school days, to first meeting Prince Charles, to her marriage, and so on. And the way it worked was that I would write out questions for her, and James was an intermediary, and he would cycle on his push bike to Kensington Palace, go into the sitting room, sit down, munch his way through a plate of biscuits, and ask Diana a bunch of questions. And then he would deliver the tapes to me, and then I would, ask more questions and so on. And it was a kind of a rinky-dink process of quite amateurish, and it didn't allow for any follow-ups, but it worked pretty effectively. And Diana's story came pouring out of her. Sometimes in the morning she was full of energy and she was very bright. In the afternoon she felt a bit beaten. So, it was always a question of trying to gauge what mood she was going to be in to answer the questions that you had. If you talked about her days in her apartment that she shared with several other girls, that was the happiest time of her life. So she always had a laugh and a giggle about that because it was a fun time. But if you spoke to her about her early days inside the royal family, that was more difficult. She called that the Dark Ages, the time when her mood was at its blackest.
Based on everything you know of Princess Diana and all of those tapes you heard, if she were here, what do you think her advice would be to Meghan and Kate?
Well, it's a good question. I think that it would be to recognise that you have great authority, great influence to do good in the world, and to use that wisely. And I think that Meghan especially is learning the ropes because she's not from the British culture, and I think she is being very wise, and I think so is Kate. They're both following in the shadow of Diana, and she did transform the way that the world sees the royal family, and she did change the way that the royal family operate. And they've got more. Duchess Kate and Duchess Cambridge have got a lot more latitude thanks to Diana.
Mm-hmm. The tabloids also say that Prince Harry and Prince William might be in a bit of a feud, might not be getting along, which you've already said that they're just tabloids and probably aren't true. But if it is true that they aren't getting along, how do you think Princess Diana would coach them at this stage of their lives?
Well, William and Harry have set up what's called separate households, and that's led to all kinds of speculation that they've fallen out. Now, the reason a royal household is a little bit like a company. It's there to support the royal prince or royal duke or duchess. And every royal male, when they marry, they start their own household. Prince Andrew did it, Prince Edward did it, and of course now Prince Harry is married and with a baby due any day now. He's set up his own household and he's got his own office in Buckingham Palace, whereas William works elsewhere. And there's anything other than it's tradition. So to make it some kind of feud, I think is willfully absurd. All that to be said, I mean, Diana always reckoned that Harry would be William's wingman, as it were, his second in command, in the nicest, and the backup for William in the nicest possible way. And I think that she would always, she would always be focused on the fact that those two worked in concert.
And do you think that Princess Diana equipped in the time that they did have, because I know she passed when Prince Harry was still really young, but do you think she was able to give him enough for him to be confident enough in the world?
Well, both William and Harry have talked about the legacy that their mother left them, and how they've been shaped by what she did for them, and things like taking them to see the homeless when they were young, going to hospitals and so on, all had an impact on them. That's why William, for example, really focused his attention on mental health and going for causes which are not particularly popular. So, Diana groomed them well. She was taken too soon, and both men have suffered, especially Harry, have suffered psychological difficulties and have gone for grief counselling. So by being open about it, I think they've helped other people to cope with their own distress.
On Saturday, you'll be supporting the charity Bloom Where Planted by attending a garden party at the Rose Tree Cottage. And there is where Meghan learned to take tea, so they say, before she met the Queen. Is that right? Have you talked to Mary and Edmund about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke to Edmund about it, and I think he said that she's been there about 6 times. So she came with friends. So she obviously, loved this little piece of England in Pasadena, and there's always been an element of the Anglophile about her. And there's a picture in the book showing Meghan and her friend outside Buckingham Palace. Who would have thought that in just a few years' time she would be standing on the balcony at Buckingham Palace looking out over the adoring masses.
Amazing. Really amazing. Now, they are about to have their first baby. What do you think, girl or boy?
Well, I'll go for girl, and I'll tell you why. Studies show that helicopter pilots produce less testosterone, and that leads them often to have more baby girls than non-helicopter pilots. It was the case with Prince Andrew, who was a helicopter pilot himself, and as Harry was an Apache helicopter pilot in Afghanistan, I'll just plump for girl.
You're on your way back to England soon. Do you plan to meet Prince Harry and Meghan one day? Do you hope to?
I'd love to meet them and just have a chat. I mean, Harry's unfortunately got quite a negative view about the mass media. I don't particularly blame him, because he was at the centre of the phone tapping scandal which racked Britain several years ago. Meghan has always been very positive towards the media, and I think it's astonishing that they opened a joint Instagram account, and they've broken all records with the number of people who've joined, something like 5 million in 11 hours, something astonishing. Guinness Book of Records.
Incredible. When you meet Meghan one day, what will be your first question?
Are you happy? And I hope she is, because she's given up a lot. I thought her career was going really well. I used to be a fan of Meghan's long before she met Harry. I thought she was great on Suits. She was funny. She was a kind of a Jennifer Aniston in waiting.